right. Good afternoon, and welcome to the fourth meeting of the National Shipper Advisory Committee and the first in-person session. My name is Dylan Richmond, and I serve as the designated federal officer for the committee. Before the committee begins their discussions today, I would like to go over their agenda for today and make a few announcements for committee members and attendees. Everyone should be aware that this meeting is being live streamed and recorded on the FMC's website. First up, the committee will hear from Commissioner Carl Binsel for an update on the Maritime Data Transportation Initiative. Following that, the Data Subcommittee will provide updates on their recent discussions. Then the committee will take a short break. Coming back from the break, the committee will consider two proposals for recommendations to the Federal Maritime Commission and put them to a vote. These recommendations have been posted on the NSAC's webpage on the FMC site for 2 weeks for members of the public to view and are also provided in hard copy for attendees. When the committee is ready to vote on each recommendation, I will ask each member for their vote in alphabetical order by last name, with the vice chair and chair voting last. This tally will be included in the formal committee minutes. There is time allotted for public comment for pre-registered guests. Members of the public are asked to keep their comments under 3 minutes. At this time, we have not received any requests for comment. In compliance with Federal Advisory Committee Act guidelines, minutes of this meeting will be available on the NSAC's webpage within 90 days of today's meeting. For committee members, please use the tint cards to signal when you'd like to speak. Committee members are also reminded that antitrust laws do apply to members in today's discussions. Finally, committee members are reminded that they cannot speak for the committee, commission, or government and their roles as members and outside of the committee structure. They may speak to their personal observations as to their committee service and personal opinions on recommendations that the committee adopts. 2 members are attending today's meeting virtually and will send in their votes via email. We will announce those votes if we receive them. Mr. Bumpus, I confirm that there is a quorum of committee members present, so you may begin the meeting.
Perfect. Thank you, Dylan. Thank you to everybody on the committee for traveling here for the first in-person meeting. It's good to see everybody with faces and not in little boxes on the computer screen. Looking forward to good conversations today. I think the in-person setting will drive better discourse and debate than we've had previously, obviously, with the setting. And it's been good to see the productivity in our subcommittees as well. There's been a lot of really good content that's come out of those subcommittees. I'm excited to hear from the data subcommittee later on today on updates from that, as I said, on the other subcommittee. But the 2 recommendations that we have to review today and vote on came from our second subcommittee on charges, freight charges, demurrage, and detention. So very excited to be making productivity there. Outside of that, again, just thank you guys for coming through. We'll go through this agenda as diligently as we can. And we want to make sure that everybody has their voice heard today. So please don't be shy, as some of you have been on Zoom. So thank you so much. Mike?
I think echoing Brian's comments, really appreciate everybody coming in early to spend deliberative time in the subcommittees. I think while the work was done virtually and got started in some core areas that we focused on, the quality of time together, I think, has really put out and expanded what we are really thinking about in support of the work that this agency does. And so I appreciate, again, everybody making that extra effort to be out here early and make yourself available.
I had the privilege of assisting Commissioner Binsel in his first hearing on his data initiative, and I'm excited to get an update today after he's had several other hearings as well and brought in dozens of folks to speak about this topic. So the floor is yours, Commissioner.
Thanks, Brian. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. I welcome y'all. This was Commissioner Dye's effort that brought us all together, and so I think it's appropriate that she's here today, and it's really sort of exciting, I think, for the Federal Maritime Commission to have distinguished panelists that are making recommendations on issues that we all care about. So I'm really happy that we're together, and I think it's a good thing. So, but I'll turn right to it. Actually, the Maritime Transportation Data Initiative was generated from a recommendation that you made in fact-finding.
Which one was that?
A few,
With the innovation teams.
a few times ago, in terms of the disruption that we've had in trade. And so, but it became apparent, I think, early in the process, where we started supply chain meltdown, that there was a lot of disconnect in terms of the information that's provided, how it's provided, and who gets access to it, and who should provide information. And so we had multiple situations, and there was, quite frankly, a lot of information. It's just that it was being transmitted in various different formats, and it's not being received by the people that needed to do it all the time. So talking with the chairman and internally, we decided to create the Maritime Transportation Data Initiative, and the chairman directed me to start the process. We've had all of our commissioners working at various times on this project, and the FMC is tasked with the potential, providing an efficient economic transportation system. And so I think if we don't look at this as an opportunity to assess the system of data communications and the data that's out there, that we're missing a big opportunity. And so common carriers, marine terminal operators, and ocean transportation intermediaries may not fail to establish, observe, and enforce just and reasonable regulations and practices related to and connected with receiving, handling, storing, and delivering property. And that's the statutory mandate that we have, and so I think it pertains to data elements that should be provided to the public at this point. So what we've been doing is we've been focusing on in the data initiative at very concretely assessing the information that's out there, the outputs that are out there for the transportation system, to establish a comprehensive lexicon, reconcile some of the discrepancies. Hopefully, we won't have that many discrepancies, but different people, different companies called different elements of transportation, different things, and recommended structures for the delivery of maritime transportation data. And we are looking at data related to transportation, not to cargo, only as it pertains to the movement of cargo through the system, from the point it's loaded on a ship to where it's delivered. And we are looking at all aspects of it. So we're looking at those that affect the movement of cargo through the entire chain. So vessel operators, movements related to government information, and how that could fit in. MTOs, of course, the terminal operators have a lot of information, and the intermediaries, the carriers, the railroads, all the way through, including BCOs, distribution centers, integrators. So we're looking at the information that they get, the information, and Carl, you can go to the next slide, but the information that's received and the information that is provided, and an assessment of data gaps, so where we're missing information. And so early information that we've observed is that the carriers and terminals have pretty good data, but that they provide differing information, and they provide differences in who they provide the information to. And we have some issues related to intermodal shipments after they get into the ports. So for instance, trucking is less transparent, and there's some issues related to equipment, the whereabouts of equipment that have been seemingly an area where we have data gaps. And we have differences, a lot of differences in how we classify, or carriers classify, the status of movement in the system. So we're working to collect information. Our staff has been great on this. Kristen, I don't know if she's here, from Bureau of Transportation Trade Analysis is heading it up on our staff. And so we're putting together recommendations for common data standards. And we will be having, and Carl, you can go there. We'll be having a data summit on June 1st. I think letters went out to all of the members of the NSAC, and so we're hopeful that you'll participate. It's going to be in person or it will be virtual, so we're accommodating to any needs, and so we'll have recommendations. We've done 16 meetings right now, I think, with 60 or 70 witnesses all throughout the supply chain. My impression is actually relatively positive. I think the industry recognizes that there's some challenges, and those challenges are, one, how they disseminate the information in certain instances, and two, how they could benefit from getting additional information. So on balance, they're sort of interested in sharing the information. We again are going to stay away from information on cargo and confidential issues related to business, but focus on status of operations and in-transit visibility. So hopefully, after we get the recommendations out, we'll be sending them out in advance of the meeting, and we intend to break out to 3 or 4 places around the FMC, get comments on it, get additional suggestions, get sticks and stones, and we'll see. After that, we'll review all of these. But we've been reviewing all of the meetings that we've had, and so we sort of have a template of the recommendations. And I would say we have a lot of commonality in terms of the data that's out there, that's available. We've covered the entire supply chain. I was out in Chicago visiting the rail yards, so we have issues through the intermodal chain. It's my view that the FMC has jurisdiction over the practices of intermodal shipments related to the carriage of cargo on a through bill of lading. And so we felt it was very important to collect information through the entire movement system. Because if you can't get it out of the rail yard in Chicago, it's gonna clog up the whole system. There's a lot of interest in the federal government in this. I'm continually working with other agencies, CBP, DOT, Commerce, USDA, State Department is doing something now. So we're in constant contact with them. We've got the flow program going on over at DOT, sort of a prototype program to assess on real time the movement of cargo from volunteer companies, and I think that will feed into our efforts. But I believe we need to set up a system of national standards of information, and hopefully we can get through the process of harmonizing, and this is the first step along the way, that we can get concurrence, broad concurrence, with what should be provided to the public and how to provide it, and then take it from there. I anticipate that after our summit, in July, we'll be meeting as a commission to discuss further the recommendations on this initiative, and we want your advice. I'd like to have you be as active as you want. I know your subcommittee is looking at these issues too. So we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We're looking at the existing information systems that are in place and how we could utilize those. We've been in discussions with some of the international groups, Digital Container Shipping Association and the international ports, who've been doing some work on this There's some work being done at the IMO separately, but I truly believe we're the furthest along in terms of looking at the information systems that are out there and collecting it. And so, but we're open to any sort of advice, recommendations, because we want to use what's there. If we're to be successful in this, we have to use the existing systems that are out there and allow them to be harmonized and to be made available. It's not going to be like the air traffic control system. It's just it's different. We've got many more players there, and so but I firmly believe that there is enough there right now that we have a central framework that we need to tweak and assess, and that there's just not much room at our ports, and there will not be a lot more capacity coming online. There may be different places, but if we can more efficiently manage through that system by using information, we'll be better off. Next time around, if we can even foreclose some of these issues, we'll be in a better situation in terms of congestion and challenge. So I'm happy to take questions from anyone, discuss anything that I presented. And Brian, I'll turn it back over to you so you can moderate the meeting.
Sure, no problem. Thanks, Carl. Any questions for Commissioner Binsel on what he's working on?
Are you ready to talk a little bit about your findings and the gaps so far?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so there are, I would say, the major issue that I've seen, terminals and carriers have good, robust information, how they transmit it and who they transmit it to, when they transmit it. There's some issues in those areas. On trucking, intermodal trucking, distribution centers, that information is not as public, and so that's equipment, chassis, intermodal equipment. So I think the gap that we really have is in that initial landside movement to the place that it's going to be shipped from. And so that will be the challenging area to address. Railroads are pretty good when the rail is operating and moving, you know where it is. But when it gets to the terminal there, they have the same challenges that we have, and it's that last leg or the first leg out of the port if it's an intermodal move. So there are challenges there. It's a huge system, as you know, and there's so many actors that are involved. And we do transloading, and we do all these other types of activities. So there's no easy answer there. And so that is the area that I think will be the most challenging. But if we don't address it, frankly, we're going to miss out because it's the thing that everyone needs. If you don't have wheels, at the end of the day, you're not going to get your cargo. So that will be the most challenging one. And I think that everyone stands to gain if we can get a better grasp on that system.
Chris, you had a question?
Sure. Oh, yeah, you mentioned that in your view, that the FMC has authority over intermodal moves and through bills of lading. What are you hearing and feeling from other stakeholders on that viewpoint?
Well, if we're challenging them, they're probably not going to be happy with that position. But we did the 1984 Shipping Act was intended to expand coverage of our authorities to encompass intermodal shipments. That was the primary purpose. While there's no definition of who's regulated under the act, our jurisdiction extends to those activities under a through bill of lading. So I don't personally see that it's, now there may be issues on who you could enforce prohibited acts on, for instance, and that I don't think is well settled. But we have jurisdiction because of the 1984 Shipping Act over intermodal actions. And we are looking at some issues right now related to trucking. There's some ongoing cases. So I'm pretty comfortable in saying that we have authority over those activities. There's some nuance there that may not be clear right now, but the Shipping Act of 1984 was intended to cover everything on international liner shipping. So, but I guarantee you, if someone feels that we're challenging them, they'll say that we don't have the authority. We get that all the time.
I have a question. What's your ideal, sort of target outcome from this initiative? In other words, assuming that all of the stakeholders involved in your project can agree on a harmonized lexicon
Yeah.
of terminology, a harmonized schedule of when data needs to be sent, to
Yeah.
who it needs to be sent, blah, blah, blah. Would participation in that platform be, in an ideal situation, be mandated, or would it be optional in terms of participation?
It's got to be a national standard that's mandatory. We
Okay.
have voluntary standards out there right now, and if it's a voluntary standard, it's not a standard. Let's be honest. And so that's my view. If you don't say that everyone's got to do it, people will not do it if it costs too much or they don't want to. And so then you lose the value of creating a national standard. So I think you have to have a program that everyone's going to abide by. And this area is so large and so comprehensive. It's probably the largest transportation system in the United States, the intermodal shipping system, and so many actors. So you have to be sensitive to that. How are you going to make everyone pay attention to the requirements? But if you don't have a compliance requirement, it's not worth it.
That's good. I think we would agree with that. Have you had any conversations with other countries as well to see if they want to participate in this and help bolster the potency of it?
It's a lot of interest in the administration on this. I think everyone recognizes what an immense challenge this is, that we're looking at a system that's so massive. And I think there's a recognition right now at how economically valuable it is. When we did the CARES Act, I think $123 billion was given to transit and the aviation industry. $4 million was given to maritime shipping, and nothing to the freight railroads or trucking industry. And so what happened? 90% of the people that were employed by aviation system went home for a year and a half. And what happened on the shipping side, intermodal side? It was booming. It's been booming, and we had 21% growth in containerized shipping, and we really didn't do the job that we need to on that. So I think the administration can recognize that, and if we look at inflationary costs caused by shipping, we're talking trillions of dollars. So they're very interested in it. I guess my thinking is that they don't know how to quite address it. So they have the Flow Act, which is a prototype. State Department sent me an email today, and they're planning a conference internationally. Really, there are no international standards in this area out there. So I would say there's probably some interest on the part of the international bodies that regulate shipping and have jurisdiction over this. So if we can do something here, I think it sends a prototype to the rest of the world. And actually, we did, Commissioner Dye and I worked on maritime transportation security, and it became a international treaty after the United States took steps. So I think there's a lot of interest internationally and domestically. Definitely the technology companies are very interested. So, but.
Okay, great. Any other questions?
Thank you for the update, really informative. In your findings, did you dig into the data quality or accuracy and timeliness, and is that going to be included in the recommendation? it's one thing to get the data, but if you don't get it at the right time, or if it's
Right.
50%
Right.
accurate, it doesn't do you any good.
Right. I think we have to look at it. I mean, if we say you have to provide information on your vessel, and where it is and when it's gonna be at berth, when it's accepting cargo, ERD, information, and it's provided after, the ship gets to berth, it's, or cancels their stop, it's irrelevant. So you have to really look at that. And so we've, on shipping, you know, even though you can see where a ship is on the 6 platforms that are out there that provide AIS data, we don't have any information about what their plan is or when they're gonna change their plan. And right now, talking to ports and terminals, they get emails. You know, and you think about that, if that was in the aviation system, if you would get an email about where your airplane was, and whether it was gonna cancel a stop, come on, you know? So I think you have to look at the quality of the information. I don't think we're gonna get into an issue. The standards are gonna be minimum standards in terms of what should be provided, when it should be provided, who it should be provided to, and potentially how it would be transmitted. So, but if you don't set up the information that they have, and require it to be done, transmitted publicly at the right time, it's not valuable.
Just a quick note, I got tapped on the shoulder. For all of us, try to speak a little bit louder and into the microphones. The folks virtually who are watching apparently can't hear us, so
Okay.
sorry. A little housekeeping there.
Do that.
Yeah. Did that answer your question, Scott?
It did.
Quick learner. You mentioned when what transmission should be sent, when they should be sent, to whom they should be sent. Are you also going to have requirements for the accuracy of that information? For example, we've seen several carriers, coming into LA Long Beach that will give the vessel arrived status
Right.
update, but it's still off the coast of Baja. So they sent the information. They sent it, at the right time, I suppose, but the information is inaccurate.
One thing I think we're looking at, if they do a poor job at providing information, I don't know, that could be an issue, and we'll have to, but we are looking at who should provide the information. So, for instance, a lot of times, ocean carriers will provide information about the availability of cargo, and it's not the same as the terminal.
Right.
Well, the terminal's the entity that should provide that information. They are in charge of it, they are holding it, they know when it can be moved. So we're looking at that closely, whether or not, I think that will have to be ironed out as we get into further steps on this, how accurate it is. But if you make the information available publicly, it lends itself at the next step to assess whether or not it's being provided in form and content that is sufficient to serve the purpose. And so, but I think right now we're looking at the more basic elements of information, how to provide it and who should provide it. But if it's not being provided adequately, it's something you have to look at the end of the day.
Okay, great. Anybody else? No? Off the hook, sir.
All right.
Thank you
Well,
so
good
much.
luck in your deliberations, and thanks for service on this panel. It's really, I think it's exciting, and.
It's an all-star team. I'm very proud of all of you, and we're thankful that you'd volunteer your time and service.
Well,
Thank
good
you.
luck, and I'll let you do your stuff. We're continuing to read all the materials and everything you provide us, so, thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right, data subcommittee discussion. I'm going to pass this to Gabriel Rodriguez, who's the chair of the data subcommittee. You got the hot mic, sir.
Thank you, Brian. So essentially, the commissioner just provided the grand majority of what our committee has been working on for the last couple of weeks. Pretty much drilling down and providing 4 specific data sets. We've been kicking back and forth the information that we want required and will be part of our recommendation probably in the next week or 2. So information on, import from vessel ETA, to port unloading, availability, hold, so on and so forth, all the way through outgate and, return of that empty unit. On the export side, flip the details and availability of the empty units and all the way through loading and shipping out. We're going to provide some detail on that specific. A particular term has come up several times. We want to see that information available as a daily diary, a chronological, time-stamped event, in some portal or some available, manner that the industry has the information available to them should there be any discrepancies on anything that's gone on. From there, we've kind of transitioned the conversation to the second portion, which, or the second, I guess, idea that we had within the committee, which is that of creating some sort of a national strategy or a national plan. Just in the same way that a lot of what the commissioners just discussed now is what we're working on. He also mentioned the different entities, other government agencies that are working on either the exact same or very similar information. And so part of our recommendation there, and we're kind of hashing out the last details on it, will be to bring together an entity that is accountable, to coordinate that information, but also accountable that all that gets brought together through the different government agencies so that basically our supply chain becomes more efficient and more fair, more balanced. From there, we also had a third concept that came up, which was basically developing an ocean shipper container bill of rights. So now kind of lending into the operational standards that should be minimum requirements, for the carriers, the MTOs, and any other entity that's involved, including rail, which was already discussed, and I'm sure we'll have a nice robust discussion about that. But that would include, having minimal requirements for whatever the particular operational standard may be within the operation of the import and export. So essentially, that's what we've been working on for the last couple of weeks, and happy to answer any questions. Or anybody else on the subcommittee want to pitch in and
Yeah, it'd be good to hear from
Provide a
the
little bit
subcommittee
more detail.
members, what thoughts they have on the three projects that you guys have. The Ocean Container Shippers Bill of Rights is pretty interesting, so get it, filling in the blanks with some color commentary would be good there.
Can you hear me? Sorry, I have a hoarse voice today. Jen Morrissey, Ocean Spray, and working on Gabriel and the data committee. And I think really what we're looking for is some kind of commitment back from the ocean carriers in response to what's happening now in the industry, right? And realize that both sides, right? It's more of a partnership because of the constraints that exist right now, so that as a shipper, we have adequate time to react to the delays that are occurring routinely.
Any other comments from the other committee members? Don't all speak at once, folks.
I think, Ken, if I could volunteer you to give a quick idea on the Bill of Rights.
Yeah, sure. So, I think the basic concept, if we think back from 2007, the meltdown of JetBlue Airline, I think if you look at that and you go back and read articles from 2007, things potentially outside of JetBlue's control, exogenous to what they were doing, right? It was a winter storm, disaster, and they made a commitment to change the way they did business and talk to their customers about really what went wrong and how can we try and do it. If you really think about what's going on today, I will argue that you can say that what's happened to this industry is outside the control of carriers or railroads or shippers for that matter. But it highlights the weak underbelly of supply chain. And I think for carriers, in my past life at a carrier, we started our first day with ISO training. Say what you do what you say. And I think there's a level of transparency of say what you do that needs to happen at this point. And then we can measure. And see, you can't really fix things until they're measurable. And I think really for carriers, it would go a long way to improving the confidence for shippers if they simply just said what they were going to do, and then we can measure against it. And I think most shippers would take that and be quite satisfied. And so I think the idea of a carrier bill of rights determined by carriers, not by shippers. I think carriers need to say this. They could do it, potentially they might want to do it at World Shipping Council level or individual level. It's really their thought, but I think our thinking and recommendation would be it would go a long way if carriers describe to shippers what they should be able to expect for the money they paid. And if they do that, I think there'll be a better active dialogue. And I think the other thing our committee has really honed in on is this is a partnership, right? Carriers don't exist if there's not cargo. Cargo doesn't move if there's not carriers. We're all in it together. And over the last number of years, really it's become more fractious. The two sides really don't communicate. People don't pick up a phone and have a chat. That really doesn't happen in real life anymore. And the result of that ultimately manifests that something as horrible as what we're all going through on both sides. I mean, I have lots of friends in the carrier community. I think they would agree. This is really not very fun for any of us. I think the way to get at that as an industry is really to have something to talk to. And as we keep talking, I think eventually we'll realize we agree on a lot more than we disagree about.
So how does this, and just to play devil's advocate for a moment, how does this then differ from language that's in most standard boilerplates now that has the, you know, the kind of the vague language of the carrier will make adequate space available to the best of its ability throughout the duration of the contract to satisfy the MQC, and the shipper then agrees also to supply cargo in an even schedule, blah, blah, blah. You guys understand that language. How is what you're describing now of carriers saying, this is what I'm going to do, and here's how I'm going to do it, how does that differ from the language that's already in the boilerplates?
So I'd say as an ex-carrier pricing person and now as someone who negotiates contracts, I look at my boilerplate once a year, hopefully. And then I hopefully put it away and I readdress it 12 months from now. I think every carrier would say the same thing. I think they've become like the back of the bill of lading. It's there, but no one looks at it.
Right.
No one really cares. I think really this is ultimately less about law and statute than a commitment to the customer. Right, that's, you could argue that, the shipping business started with our word's our bond. This is our word. We're gonna try and do this. I think if you start there and you get out of the, let's codify this as law and statute, you probably get a lot more done. And so, back of the bill lading's there. The service contract, again, service contract's confidential. Some shippers probably have very good ones. Some have the standard that the carrier gave them. I know certainly we deal with every carrier in North America. Every document's slightly different. Some are good, some are bad. But really, when we get stuff done, it's because we talk to the carrier and have a conversation about what's the right thing to do. And generally, I can say our partners actually do the right thing. I think nationalizing that and codifying it in a document that helps carriers make that message will help carriers, which will help shippers, which will help the country.
Fair enough.
And I think building upon what Ken said, there have been a couple of different ocean carriers that have put that amount on their own. So it's been an approach that's been looked at from a more, I'm not going to say a competitive standpoint necessarily, but trying to differentiate themselves from a service perspective, right? And so expand that out. There's already been carriers that have been willing to do it to the broader industry, as Ken talks about, to really focus on some of these things that are really behavior, right? It's not judging where it's at, but it's not supportive of what the system needs, right? And the people that are working within it. So we don't have to, the regulatory piece is the service contract, right? And tariff filings and all the other things that are officially in place and under the scope of this agency. It's more getting into what about behavior between principal actors in the freight system can be improved in light of what we've been going through. And I think we can put some specifics in terms of themes that we would recommend from a cargo standpoint to be able to have out in front of people. But I think at the end of the day, to the point raised, it's going to have to be the carriers looking at, how do they take this and what would they do with it?
Understood. Any questions on that piece of this?
As far as the Bill of Rights document is concerned,
Mike?
was there ever any consideration given to including the activities of us, the shippers, into that?
I was gonna ask that as
That
well.
we have a certain we need to kind of commit a certain level of responsibility to do the right thing, to enable the carrier to do his job. I mean, a lot of, as a forwarder MVO, a lot of times we're in a situation where we're in the middle, trying to broker the anger of the shipper against the defense of the carrier. And I mean, and I think it might not be a bad idea that rather than an ocean carrier Bill of Rights document, kind of call it an ocean transportation Bill of Rights document, which includes the responsibilities of us as the people moving the freight. Any thought to that?
I think it's a great idea. I mean, I would say it that this industry's become so siloed, right? And we're all so busy, shippers, carriers, intermediaries, everyone's busy, terminal operators, truckers. What I do and how it affects the next person in line is lost. In many cases, I'm so busy staying in my swim lane, I can't think about the adjacent spots. But the truth is, the shipper has as much of a responsibility as the next party. And I think that translates right to the truckers and the terminals and the chassis providers. And so, no, I think it's not always, it's not, I think one of the things our subcommittee really, as we talked, it's not good shipper, bad carrier at all. And I think that's, that, I think people who think like that don't understand the inner workings of this industry. It's parties not communicating. And so to quantify a little bit what the shipper's role is in that and how they could make this work better, I think that's a really good idea.
And it starts at a place of common interest, right? So again, I think what you're saying, Bob, makes sense because it's not an ask one side what you're going to do for us. This is a system that we work together on. And to your point, there may, whether intended or unintended, there are inefficiencies in our behaviors as we work with one another, as Ken's saying, that have consequences farther on in the system that may be good for the single entity but have a significant impact. And so by focusing on common interests is the way to move forward. And any of these things we're talking about, whether it's data or behavior or how we move forward in beyond this environment, what we take away from what we've been experiencing, we have more common interest than with divergent interest in what we do, right? And so how do we focus on those areas that can make an impact and give us the leverage to make improvement to what we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis? So it makes sense, and I think I've made a note on it as well to incorporate it in there.
Have you guys talked at all about establishing data, I hate to say requirements, but for lack of a better word, let's go with requirements, for shippers to supply forecasts to carriers 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks out?
Quite frankly, no. But to the point, it's, probably our next conversation now. But no, we've been focusing more on carrier, terminal, rail, that type of information, but it's a good point.
And just to that comment specifically too, I think as we talk about these things, especially for the people that are not in the room today, public feedback, public commentary on what we're deliberating about is important, right? Because again, we represent a lot of different sectors and physical flows and regions of the country, but it's not all inclusive. And so we are hearing on specific issues from people. So I'm going to state it now, and I'll state it in my closing comments, that we want to hear from the broader community on what's going on as we get more specific on recommendations and on work we're doing, because we have a lot of well-experienced and diverse perspective in this room, but it's not complete, right? There's a lot of other people that are not here with us today. And so we want to make sure that if we try to find common interest and moving forward, we're hearing from as many people as possible to really say, yeah, this has got traction, right? This has got traction from the majority of the cargo owners or the people that work on our behalf, say the trucking community or something like that, on a particular issue. It's extremely important to have that kind of engagement. We believe we bring certain perspectives to the group here, and then like for myself, we were meeting as cotton shippers and talking about some of these things that the subcommittee is talking about and getting their perspective on it before I come back to this meeting. And so just trying to bring that kind of additional guidance into the room is helpful to figure out really where are the points of greatest interest, because that may be the possible ways to move forward and make the progress first as we try to deliver on some of these commitments.
Yeah. I think it's also important that we just try to maintain as much objectivity as we can as we evaluate these and try to see not just from shippers' perspective, but also from the carrier's perspective as it relates to detention demurrage, as we have in our subcommittee, and data, as I think you guys are in your subcommittee as well. But great. What else can you guys tell us from your subcommittee and what you're working on? You had a meeting yesterday and another one today, making progress?
Right. So, I mean, we spent a good amount of time towards the end of the day yesterday and most of the time today discussing this concept of a national supply chain. There's a little bit of frustration and just in the reality that there's so many different entities that are involved, kind of overlapping in some of the work that they're doing. So there will be some sort of a recommendation on our part to provide for one entity that kind of harnesses all of that data, harnesses the coordination of, amongst the different agencies, and then can be the accountable party, right? That would be responsible to report back and ensure that everybody's following suit. Kind of a twofold, in doing that, hopefully be able to work more efficiently through, some of what we're all currently doing, these different agencies and ourselves, to provide for better alignment and hopefully start to provide some solutions to the current market, and then also to provide for a future strategy, right? So that current situation that we're in, where, kind of everybody's got their hands tied, is something that we can kind of maybe peek into the future a little bit and try to find areas where we can avoid. Don't bring a 10,000 TEU ship into a port that can only handle 1,000 TEUs. You're going to have a problem. So provide for some, some insight in that aspect to provide for more long-term view and hopefully be able to alleviate any future problems.
Do you guys hit any roadblocks or obstacles in your thinking in terms of problems that you're going to have with your recommendations and struggling to figure out how to get around those obstacles? Anything that you want to bring up and get insight from the full committee?
Go for it.
I would say, I think it's kind of some of the dialogue that we're having now is that every single shipper is different. Like even your question on forecasting.
Right.
We as Target provide forecasts, but if
We do
I
as
was
well.
at a company that ships 50 containers a year and it's extremely unreliable, like can you put that in a bill for someone, it's one person and they're doing the end to end, is forecasting a reasonable thing? So I think that's kind of the balance of how do we make progress and take a step in the right direction that helps the majority, but may not fix it and solve it because the needs of an importer are different from an exporter at the size and the scale versus, the complexity that you're going across. And I think it's the same from a carrier standpoint as well. If you're a carrier operating South America into Miami versus China into the West Coast, very different operations as well. And as we were even talking, the language that we were using and the requirements that we may have in the group were different in terms of who did what. Is that the dray provider that does that, or is that the shipper that does it? And what does the carrier do in that scenario? So I think that's some of the nuance in it, is what is the right way to meaningfully make progress forward, but it may not provide benefit to every single party that is involved in the long chain of getting goods from whatever country it is or into another country.
Yeah, I think you'd have to apply the 80-20 rule on that. Your example of a shipper who's moving 50 containers, his ability or inability to provide a forecast really isn't going to move the needle that much industry-wide, right? You, on the other hand, would, right? Or Mr. Brock. So I understand what you're saying.
One of the issues that we're finding out is who is the accountable party, right? So there's so many actors in the supply chain where we might have a bill of lading that goes inland, but it's moving through the rail. Who is the accountable party to the BCO in this case? Because in most cases, it seems like we are signaling different parties, but no one is really finally accountable for what's going on or what is the delay, what the reason code is and all of that. So that is something that I think we're all kind of having issues trying to understand. Is it just whoever put the bill of lading, or do we, as a BCO, do I need to really go to the rail even though I don't have a direct relationship with the rail? So the ocean carrier does, but I didn't subcontract that directly. So how do we manage that through the committee and the recommendations that we're thinking about?
Is there anybody here that would have an argument in favor of having the BCO go to the rail in that scenario? Because from where I sit, I would say it's the ocean carrier, right? Because they've got the bill of lading, they're the one ones that are subcontracting out. I agree with you, but is there anybody who has the devil's advocate perspective there?
So, just one thought on this. Yeah, so just one thought on this. When it comes to getting the data component of it, right? I think there might be, one argument that you can make is that you have to get the data from the right source, right? And it's all you're doing is, the ocean carrier is not moving the box. The box is being moved to the rail company, right? Like they actually know when the box gets on a rail, that gets unloaded, gets delivered. So when it comes to, if the argument is like, how does the data flow versus how does, like, who do you actually contact? I think that's, to me, those are two slightly different things, right? If you're talking about building a portal that says, collate all the data and collate all the data from the right sources, then you're essentially, to me, the right source is whoever's moving the freight. Like, for example, on the part of the, when does a container become available in a terminal? Like a lot of the times we get that information from the ocean carrier, right? But the ocean carrier is just intermediary that's getting the information from the actual terminal, right? So to me, if we are thinking about, does a BCO need to go to a particular carrier? I agree that a BCO is contacted with the ocean carrier, and that's where they should be getting, the insights. But the problem is, if you're talking about getting the flow of data, then wouldn't it make sense? And at least that's my devil's advocate argument here, is that wouldn't you want to go get the data from the right source and be able to filter that information into the right portal, and then you can kind of siphon the information from there instead of going through an intermediary? So to me, there are two different things, right? If you're just asking for who's moving my freight, yeah, the ocean carrier is moving your freight, and there's still the name on the bill of lading. But if you're talking about where's the best source of getting the data, the best source of getting the data is actually the rail carriers that are moving the freight, right? So if you're talking about a place to consolidate the data, I think you should be going to the source. At least that's my opinion, is that we should be identifying the right source for every single point in the supply chain, and the most accurate source in every single point of the supply chain, and then figure out a way to siphon that data in the right, and collate the data in the right way, and get it available to everybody. So that would be my one slight counter argument.
So maybe it's kind of, the data source would make sense, but if there's escalation, that's where you go to your ocean carrier.
Right. To me, the data piece is different from who are you going after if your freight's not moving.
Yes.
Right? So for us, if you're thinking about data, then, if you're thinking about data, so I think what we need to do is probably identify the most ideal source for every single piece of part of the supply chain where we can get the most, that particular data from as accurately as possible.
Yes.
And then once we identify that, then we can find a way to roll that into, I think if we can identify that and we can get buy-in into that particular concept, then I'm sure there's tech companies out there that will find a way to roll that up for us into a consolidated single source platform, right? Because there's a lot of interest in being able to get our hands on each segment of the data that is accurate, right?
Who can provide the information first?
Right.
Is what we want. We don't want it to go from a terminal to an ocean carrier that sits in Europe back to the United States. It's got to make sense.
Well, there's two questions there. I mean, like modern TMS platforms, and I think most of us probably have a TMS platform that we use on our own, but it aggregates all of your transported information, right? Air freight, ocean freight, over-the-road freight, whether it's LTL or full truckload, drayage, rail, right? So that's a depository of all these integrations that a company has built or established with their logistics partners or sub-partners. In the event that there's a shipper that doesn't have, let's say, an EDI or API integration with UP or Norfolk Southern, for example, are they going to invest in that relationship? I mean, are they going to invest in that integration when it's not their direct commercial relationship? Or if the integration has to be established, wouldn't that integration be better served, at least in the preliminary stages between the rail and the ocean carrier, assuming that that shipper already has an integration directly with that ocean carrier or via an NVO like Mallory Alexander who has their own ADIs? Does that make sense? Then there's the other part of that coin to dissect it is data visibility is one thing, and I agree. I 100% agree with what you're saying, Adnan. But seeing where my cargo is on the rail, let's say, from Seattle to Chicago is one thing. But if there's a delay in Montana, and I have a concern about that delay, I want to know what the reason for the delay is, I want to know how long it's going to last, I don't have any commercial relationship with the rail. So I would then have to call the ocean carrier, right? So we have data visibility, but then we also have issues arising from that data visibility.
Yeah,
Because
I don't-
ignorance is bliss. If you don't have the data, you don't know if it's delayed.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I think the way I was thinking about this from my perspective is, how do you ensure that you're getting the right data in the system, and where are you going to get that right data? But to your point, if there's a delay in the supply chain, you don't have a direct relationship with that particular service provider, you're gonna go to your ocean carrier to do that, right? So to me, those are two different things, right? Like, how do you get the data versus who do you approach in a scenario where there's a problem? To me, those are two different problems that we're looking at.
Agree, which I think, not to speak on your behalf, but I think we were talking about the latter one of.
Yeah, and my
Completely
point was
agree.
more the accountability of it.
Yeah,
Because
operational issues and resolutions.
Just because you provide the data, but you're not accountable for the data, it does nothing good for the problem they have, the party that have the issue. You want to be able to go, unless, again, we believe that the platform will be the only source of truth, and then we're all going to be based on the same parameters, then yes, that makes sense. But today, we're not there, so we need to, and just the fact that we're discussing is because it's still not clear to all of us what that system should be and how it should work.
But the data, having the data will allow you to have the right conversation at the right time versus today, you're finding out through word of mouth after the fact and the damage is already done. And so just being able to see what's happening will lead you to having the right conversation with the right person at the right time.
It's about the chronology and the time stamping on the sequence of events for a container associated to a booking through the life of that booking, so that the shipper or the carrier or whomever is invested in the movement of that container can see it and it's time stamped and it doesn't vanish once it moves to the next status.
Yeah, we really feel like this diary is an important part of the evolution of your container from going from point A to point Z. And it's, if you disagree with something that happened and based on the terms of your agreement, offset, reset, whichever it is, you'll be able to document it. And if you have a dispute and something that happened within the journey, you'll be able to have it within a public record versus email spreadsheets going back and forth. I think that's important.
You're describing blockchain essentially then, a public ledger of events, yeah.
And I think it's just observing and listening to the conversation. I think it's, you think about yourself as a customer in your normal life, like the Domino's pizza tracker, or anytime you order anything online, like UPS and FedEx are proactively letting you know, hey, we just picked this up. Hey, it's out for delivery. Hey, there was an issue. It's not going to come on Thursday. It's going to come on Friday. And I think it's just interesting to observe this of like, we are having to track down every individual container when there are issues versus the proactive customer service nature of like, hey, FYI, something happened, this is going to be now not arriving at the rail yard on this date, but we got you an appointment for the next date available, have your truck ready at 3 p.m., that's when we're ready to go. And there's just not that sense there. I think that's what that diary kind of provides, is that everyone sees the same thing and has the ability to then take the proactive action associated with it.
With data, you can optimize. If you know what's happening, you can plan and deviate from your plan and pivot faster than the trucker getting in line and I can't bring that empty back. And if you can pivot, then you can optimize that truck or driver to do, and then you start to create efficiencies and flow and what we all want.
Agree completely.
So quick question on, like, again, I think what Gabe started with saying about the alignment of the other people working on this. So, I mean, obviously Commissioner Binsel was talking about these very same things and the flow initiative. So are like, is he talking to the same people you're talking to? And, is there conversation there to not have this overlap? And you might have been addressing that initially.
The issue is that that is what it is occurring. So what we're recommending is, somebody assign a specific entity, whether it's within the FMC or, some other committee or some other, not an agency, but some other entity, let's give it that word, that would be the central focal point for that, and then the accountable party for that, for these conversations and this information.
Yeah.
Cool. Any more questions or further comments from the committee members? No. All right, well, we're getting close to a break, but I did want to bring up one topic prior to that, which is a proposal that's sort of spun out of our freight charges demurrage and detention subcommittee, related to the creation of a third subcommittee focused on the availability and utilization of chassis specifically. So I just wanted to have a brief couple-minute conversation about that before we go to break, and then just make sure that we're all okay with forming that third subcommittee. So, Rich, you want to start that conversation off?
Sure. I think that, chassis have become a critical piece whenever we see some issues on empty containers not being taken back in or containers being used for storage. We're utilizing chassis. There's a shortage of them. They become like gold out there. I think, one of the things is that we could maybe, as an effective committee, make a recommendation on more efficient use of chassis, not have chassis sitting in one pile that can't be used by one, if they're for one steamship line and reserved for them, maybe more gray area pools and things like that. So there's a lot of different components to it, but I certainly think that there's some room for some dialogue and a deep dive into chassis utilization and availability.
Could we also form recommendations for the broader shipper community overall on our own experiences and how to optimize chassis availability and make, get the most bang for the buck when you get your hands on one?
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be an awesome goal if we could get to that point. How do we make the flow better, right?
Right. Anybody else with any quick thoughts on the formation of that third subcommittee? No? Bob?
The whole matter of chassis is near and dear to me and my company's heart. There's so much gray area on chassis right now that it really needs to be fixed. And having looked at it 100 different ways to Sunday, one thing that jumps off the page to me is that there is a significant volume of freight moving in Asia, there's a significant volume of freight moving in Europe, and there's a significant volume of freight moving in the US. But it seems to me that in many cases, the freight is moving a lot more efficiently in Asia and in Europe than in the United States. And the one thing that I've recognized is that in Europe and in Asia, the chassis is tied more closely to the trucker. Their terminals operate with the understanding that a trucker's going to come in with a chassis with a load for an export. That box is going to come off. That terminal is then prepared for that trucker with that chassis to go another place and pick up another container. Obviously, it can't always be that simple, different terminals, et cetera, but I really think that we need to consider some kind of an initiative to try to move the entire industry to an environment where the chassis are more closely tied to the activities of the truckers.
I think there are some nuances that make it more difficult in the U.S. I mean, we're probably closer to Asia than we are to Europe in that regard. Just geographically, the scope of land that we cover with our chassis is significantly greater. And then the road limitations and bridge weight limitations over axle weight restrictions that we have in the U.S. are not necessarily the same as they are in other countries. Even our neighbors to the north have much more generous road weight limits than we do here in the States, which sort of forces a diversion of chassis types, right? So as a chemical importer, for example, I don't really use that many standard slider chassis. I mean, it's primarily triaxles. 86% of my loads are triaxle chassis. So, to your point of the chassis could be more closely related to the trucker, in my case, they are already, because generally triaxles are owned by trucking companies, right? For some of the more, retail or CPG guys who are moving 40s that are not overweight, it's certainly more of an issue. But I think that this subcommittee should look at all of those variables to make recommendations, again, both to the carrier side and also to the shipper community as well.
And the guidance I'd pass along after 5 years working with Commissioner Dye in Memphis on chassis is utilize her and the work that's been done as a resource. I mean, Memphis, with 5 Class 1s, it's both a capacity, I've coined it as a capacity blessing and a complexity curse, right? The operating model thereafter, in terms of the rail footprint, and overlaying other commercial considerations like box rules makes things more challenging. But then at the same time, in being involved with AgTC, the AgTC members are on chassis. Some parts of the country, to Brian's point, truckers already there, right? So it is a national problem. I think guidance in retrospect is to make sure you're involving all the stakeholders early on in the process, right? Because I think this is gonna, it's an issue of national consequence that we're living with day to day. And everyone, when that process started, has the solution for somebody else. You know, that kind of shifts it to them. And I'm not saying that that's the focus of this, but take that into account, that this is no different than what we're talking about on data or anything else within these deliberations. There's a lot inside of it that it's going to be more of a multiple solutions to get to what we're talking about to improve the system. Because regional differences are regional differences. Operating footprints at intermodal terminals are different, grounded versus wheeled versus mixed. All of that sits inside the work, but also leverage what's been done, not to say what's already been looked at, but help guide a possible way forward that hasn't been yet realized, right? So.
Agreed. Okay, great. So we'll do that. If you have interest in participating, you know, committees or subcommittees aren't mutually exclusive. You can do more than one. Just send an email to me and Mike and Dylan if you would in the coming days and let us know if you're interested in that topic. So with that, let's take a 15-minute break. We'll come back at. Yeah.
We could get by with it.
7-second pointers.
All right, good deal. Hope you guys had a quick break. We're gonna open up an update from our freight charges, demurrage, and detention subcommittee. Just a second, I'm gonna kick it over to Rich. We've been pretty productive on this subcommittee, so he's got a pretty good update for you. Look for participation from all of our subcommittee members on this, and we're going to introduce 2 recommendations and then ultimately take votes on those today as well here in the full committee. So, Mr. Roach, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you. So we formed a subcommittee to look at other ancillary charges to freight charges, and we quickly found that there was a lot of different areas that we needed to discuss. In putting it together, we started kind of grouping it all and quickly found out that we were getting into the weeds very quickly on different topics. So we decided to spread out those topics and introduce them each as their own recommendation. So we did discuss, and we do have 2 proposals or recommendations in front of us, but we discussed some other things, and I'll just briefly touch on some of the other topics that we're talking about. One is the ERD, or early return date issues. Another is ancillary charges that come from customs holds. Another would be liner demurrage. And then lastly, dispute resolution. So those are all topics in discussion within the subcommittee right now. But we've chosen to conclude 2 of these additional recommendations. The first being the excess dwell fees, and the other is FMC oversight of intermodal cargo on a through bill of lading. So I'll introduce the first one, the excess dwell fees. It's in public record, the actual recommendation that we've brought forward. But basically, the charge was intended to be imposed on ocean carriers, but subsequently, it was never introduced by the ports, the excess dwell fee, and basically citing that it was effective just by threat only. However, some individual marine terminals have since imposed this excess dwell fee in addition to their demurrage tariffs, and we list these terminals up and down the West Coast and the effective dates that they've had these excess dwell fees. The contention is that these fees, which were initially sorted out and looked at as to be imposed on the ocean carriers, when the marine terminals announced them, they announced them as for the beneficial cargo owners only. Unfortunately, we have arm's length as importers, an arm's length relationship with these marine terminals, and therefore we feel that maybe there's no oversight or proper oversight when we have dispute resolutions, that they're charged in advance of cargo release without any real understanding of who we can file this dispute with and so forth. So if this proposal for dwell fees, the recommendation is that the Federal Maritime Commission codify regulation in concert with the interpretive rule, incentivizing the movement of cargo that prohibits any unreasonable application of charges on containers for dwell fees, while shifting the burden of proof to vessel operators and/or marine terminals, and strengthening requirements for proper dispute resolution. So that's the actual action item that we will be voting on shortly, and I would open it up to the committee members for any further comment that they'd like to add to that.
Deb, you drove this one initially. Do you have any insight you want to share to kind of drive conversation?
Yeah, I think Rich did a great job summarizing. A lot of us as BCOs have no control over where these costs are coming from. When we can't return empty containers, when there are no chassis available, all of this has been shifted to the BCO and shipper. And it directly is in conflict with the purpose of fees, which is to incentivize cargo movement. And by doing so and just charging a fee when you can't move the cargo because of reasons out of your control, we feel that this is a violation and it should be addressed. So our hope is that with this first recommendation, that it gives the FMC some support.
Yeah. And just aligning the dwell fee concept with the interpretive rule, what's already been spelled out there.
Correct. Yes.
Correct.
Yep, we want to maintain that consistency.
Okay. And trying to get a feel for how big of an issue this really is and the representative sample group that we have here. How many of you guys have already paid dwell fees? Pretty much everybody on the import side then. So this is, I think, a pretty egalitarian topic, I would say, yeah.
It's kind of ironic, too, that I'd add that some of these same terminals can bury our containers for months on end, and then there's no repercussions to them at all for the delay that they impose on us because they can't effectively handle them. But then we get charged for dwell fees when they go in excess of 9 days or whatever their specific agreement is. And it's, the irony's not lost in our recommendation here because we've noted that.
And the structure of them, too, was punitive because it was escalating. It wasn't just a flat fee per day
Correct.
over 9 days. It was escalating. It was exponential.
Some of them were, yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
And still are, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, they still exist today. And that was also an urgency is, how is this helping? In LA Long Beach, they kept continuing and not charging the dwell fee because the mere threat improved things. Well, now here's a cost being associated and it hasn't improved anything, then I would say there's another problem. And again, we're on the hook to pay for a problem that we maybe partially helped to create, but we are certainly not the sole owner. But we're the only ones paying for it.
Yeah. And I would argue that we did not help create that problem.
I get it. That's why I said might, depending on how you want to look at it, but yes.
Any insight or feedback from members of the data subcommittee on this recommendation?
So I think this might be one of the most egregious things that's happened in our industry in the last 10 years, personally.
Don't mix words, Ken.
It's an affront. We have a charge for this. It's called demurrage, and we all pay it. We're fine paying it. We don't like it, but we pay it because we didn't move the box, and so we pay. For a party not, as a member of the bill lading, to just pick out a charge, do it over Christmas, don't give 30 days notice, and make money off that charge by performing at a lower level, that's wrong. It's just simply wrong. Carriers agree. If you talk to carriers, they agree. It doesn't make sense. And so I think the FMC should have put their foot down on it earlier, and I wholeheartedly support the sub-team's recommendation. I think it's absolutely the right thing.
If I may quote from the Federal Register notice on the interpretive role, I found a passage that I thought was very appropriate to this. It basically says, according to the incentive principle, which is supported by law, charges should be mitigated when efficiency incentives cannot be achieved. This is especially true when demurrage and detention charges are applied for an illegitimate purpose or dwell fees, which when specifically applied at a penal level are not justifiable to a carrier or an MTO's need for revenue. And I think this applies to all of the fees.
I would agree.
So that's codified in the FR.
So hearing what Steve just read, I don't even think the measure goes far enough. I think the FMC should force the issue that every dollar be returned.
Retroactive to which point?
Retroactive,
3 years?
since they were, since they were filed this winter.
Yeah, no, this started November was the earliest one.
Well, I'm not even talking about just dwell fees. I know the recommendation's only dwell fees, but to go on what Ken's
I'm just
and
12
what Steve
feet, so
read.
I don't want to go too far.
Yeah,
This
yeah.
would be encompassing of demurrage as well.
Yeah, 3 years. 3 years is what we're talking, right, Rich?
Yeah, well, that's retroactive, right? But, I mean, for these particular dwell fees,
It would be.
November 1st is the actual start
Yes.
date, yeah.
But going beyond the dwell fees, detention and demurrage also going back 3 years.
Good.
But not related to this.
Correct. Demurrage is not
be
in this,
clear.
specific for
Yes,
dwell fees.
but
I
it's-
think we're in this,
I'm
yeah.
conflating it all, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But the spirit is the same. Any
Yes.
other comments or questions?
Well, just for clarity's sake, when we vote on this today, we're voting on what's on the paper, but for public record, we're not.
Chris?
Just for clarity, when we vote today, we're voting on what is on the paper and in the public record. We're not voting on going back on demurrage for 3 years.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
That's correct. In the absence of registered public comments or questions, any non-committee members in the room have any input on this recommendation or questions? No? Cool. Good squad. Rich, any further comments before a vote?
Nope, I think that says it all.
I move that we, as a committee, vote on this first recommendation out of the subcommittee.
Is there a second?
All right, with the the recommendation seconded for the dwell fee, I will go through committee member by committee member. Please indicate yea or nay. Mr. Brock,
yay.
Mr. Colley,
Yay.
Mr. Connor,
Yay.
Mr. Crutchfield,
Yay.
Mr. Fremont,
Yay.
Mr. Healy,
Yay.
Mr. Hughes,
Yay.
Ms. Jacobson,
Yay.
Mr. Laganell,
Yay.
Ms. Levitt.
Yay.
We received a vote from Mr. Miller, who is participating virtually. He votes yay. Ms. Minsky,
Yay.
Ms. Morrissey,
Yay.
Mr. O'Brien,
Yay.
Mr. Cudry,
Yay.
Mr. Roche,
Yay.
Mr. Rodriguez,
Yay.
Mr. Simoneas, and Mr. Bumpus. All right, we may have a few more votes that come in virtually from other committee members, but the yays will have a majority. So. 19. We have 19 yays. 19 yays. So, all right.
Recommendation passes, and we'll follow the process to get this to the FMC then. Thank you guys for your support on that.
Thank you all.
I think we should give ourselves a round of applause for the first recommendation on the board. Doing big things, folks. All right, moving on to the second recommendation then, I'll let Rich introduce this one, but this is the FMC oversight of intermodal cargo on through bills of lading.
And we've already heard from Commissioner Binsel earlier today on this same topic, which is a pretty good segue into this. We've discussed this at length, and I think historically we've seen that the STB does not wish to have jurisdiction over intermodal rail on through bills of lading. In fact, based on deregulation, they just don't have that authority. We've heard from some of the trade journals a number of times that also the FMC does not have the authority, which we feel is incorrect, and so does Commissioner Binsel. So this particular recommendation today would expand the scope of the Federal Maritime Commission to have oversight over all shipments with an ocean bill of lading, including rail transportation, unto the final destination defined within the bill of lading. As we look at this, I think it would provide tremendous clarity for the FMC to stand up and declare that they do have this authority, and it would bring probably a lot more cases of storage issues, per diem type storage issues on the rail, particularly that right now are registering into the millions and millions of dollars based on the rail's inability to process our shipments in a timely manner through no fault of our own. So therefore, as the advisory committee, we hereby recommend that the Federal Maritime Commission be given oversight over all carriers, subcontractors, rates, demurrage, detention, storage under any other name, terms and conditions, and modes reflected on any bill of lading issued by an ocean carrier. Additionally, we recommend that the FMC begins mandating the provision of accurate transit, cargo location, and container pickup and return locations by carriers to shippers and their nominated forwarders and/or brokers. Finally, in the event of a conflict between the terms of the Uniform Intermodal Interchange Access Agreement, the UIIA, and the FMC's oversight and interpretive rule, it is the recommendation of this committee that the terms of the FMC shall prevail. Brian, can I turn it over to you to make any additional comments on rail jurisdiction?
Yeah, sure. I thought your summary was great there. This recommendation is really poised to tackle the ambiguity that surrounds storage and detention, or storage and demurrage rather, at rail points. The interpretive rule currently, with the omission of the FMC's oversight over the rail currently, the interpretive rule does not apply to that storage, and we're looking to kind of expand the FMC's oversight so that interpretive rule then also by default expands to cover storage in those areas. The way that we've talked about interpretive rule in our subcommittee and on the broader level at the full committee level is demurrage resultant from factors outside of the control of shippers that inhibit our ability to pull cargo should not necessarily be resultant in demurrage, correct? Government holds, customs exams don't just happen at seaports, they also happen at rail ramps, and you have mitigated free time there. So in a best case scenario at a port, let's say you have 5 working days of free time with your ocean contracts, a quick customs exam or a VACUS exam, you could be in and out within that free time period, barring any other environmental factors like what we've experienced the last couple of years. At a rail ramp, though, most of us have severely mitigated free time, a day, 2 days, right, including the day that the cargo is off the train. It could happen at 3:30 in the afternoon. Pickup number might not be generated until 5 p.m. that day, so you have 1 day. If customs even wants to do a quick VACUS exam, you're almost guaranteed with the current structure to pay demurrage on that. So the first purpose of this recommendation is to sort of rectify that and offer some level of remedy and ammunition to the FMC to protect shippers, but also to protect carriers too. I mean, it's a double-edged sword there. One of the examples that is in this recommendation that this committee fielded was from a customs broker that was representing a shipper who had a merchant, basically, not merchant haulage, but a carrier haulage door delivery. Supposed to terminate in Miami, discharge, and the carrier was using their trucking assets to move that freight to the final door location. Customs broker for that shipper filed the entry in Miami per the original booking confirmation bill of lading. Carrier determined they were going to discharge that in Tampa without any prior notice to the shipper or to their nominated broker. That resulted in I think $6,000 or $8,000 of demurrage as no information on the cargo location was provided to the shipper or the broker, and they had to file a PSC with Customs to retract the customs entry that had already been filed in Miami and refile that in Tampa. They had to clear that demurrage and then pull the container off. So one aspect of this recommendation, or one line that was in there that Rich had read, I'm going to reread it here, is additionally, we recommend that the FMC begins mandating the provision of accurate transit, cargo location, and container pickup and return locations by carriers to shippers and their nominated forwarders and our brokers. That sentence kind of tackles that other issue there that also leads to demurrage exposure. And while that's not necessarily a rail issue, it is still demurrage that was having to be paid by a shipper on a carrier door move. So, we wanted to address that as that's kind of a scenario that could slip through the cracks as well. The final sentence of, the recommendation, or recommending that the terms of the FMC shall prevail over any sort of conflict with the UIIA. Obviously, the UIIA is not a government entity, the FMC is, and so just based on hierarchy, that makes the most sense. But also, we want to make sure that interpretive rules tentacles touch all of the aspects of transactions that we want. So with that, I'll yield.
Any other comments from the committee, the subcommittee, I should say, and the committee at large?
How is this oversight given? Post the recommendation moving forward? Does it have to be within, I think, I hear what we're saying and I'm supportive of it. I'm just trying to, what's the next step, I guess, would be the way to put it. How does it, because again, I agree with you, when the interpreter rule came out, people immediately were disputing the applicability in the interior environment on through bills of lading, right? So this has to clear the air and be settled once and for all, that they're the agency of record on this and responsibility for it. Does it have to be within the current OSFRA discussions? How does this happen? How does it move forward?
Yeah, I understand your point, Mike. And I think that it is more by declaration from the FMC that we're looking for.
Okay.
I'm sure that if declared and incorrect, they will be shot down. But without a declaration, they're not shooting down what's out there in the trade journals and the speculation that's out there that no one has. It's a gray area and no one has jurisdiction. In our view, this is cargo that's moving on a through bill of lading that the FMC very much has jurisdiction over, and therefore by declaration, they should be able to take that jurisdiction on.
Thank you.
It seems almost silly to even have to make the recommendation, right? Because, I mean, the FMC clearly has jurisdiction over the bill of lading. I haven't seen a statute that limits their oversight based on the mode of that bill of lading.
Right.
You either have oversight over the entire document or you don't have oversight over any of it.
Correct. But for some reason, I think the actual declaration has been sidestepped for some time now.
I agree.
It's been a few years we've been knocking on this door.
Yeah.
So, and the current situation with the rail over the last couple of years has precipitated this discussion.
Good. Any other questions from the committee members? Comments, input? All right. Yo, sorry, Adam.
So I'm not as close to this, so maybe I just, for a clarification point, in terms of the driving jurisdiction over the UIIA component of it, how would that make the situation overall much better? Like in terms of, because one of the things that I was trying to get some clarity on is like, and again, not being as close to this particular scenario because we don't move a lot of volume through rail. So just wanted to kind of get a little bit of clarity on the UIA jurisdiction and how does this make situations a lot better for the overall customers of this?
I'll start to tackle that and maybe Brian will have some follow-up, but the UIIA has limited scope in who it applies to, and so almost none of us in the room here have the UIIA applying to us. Correct me if I'm wrong, anybody. And so what we're asking for is for FMC jurisdiction on bills of lading that we are party to. So my thought in answering your question is that this squarely puts the FMC in charge of our issues to the extent that the UIIA may have a different view over timing of billing and any of the other issues that they have. The interchange itself, that's between the truckers and the terminals and the carriers, but not us. So this is for us. Brian?
Yeah, I agree. I don't really have too much to add to that. you know, to Rich's point, you know, to UIIA membership requires the ownership of assets. And, you know, I think some of us may have some chassis, trucks perhaps, but most of us, if any of us, are not members of the UIIA. I don't necessarily foresee any true conflicts between the two organizations. They kind of sit independently of each other and are looking at two different sets of issues. But in the event that there is some level of conflict, we do want the interpretive rule, and we do want the FMC's governmental oversight, again, to prevail, correct? Yep. It's a more representative body for all the parties involved in the transaction. Yep. Any other comments?
It's interesting that the FMC was looking for feedback on that topic in the ANPRM that was just recently submitted and concluded, at least the comments period. And so we're kind of answering the question right there with this particular recommendation ahead of time.
Great minds think alike, Rich.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what they say anyway. Okay, so questions or comments from anybody else in the room, not on the committee? No? Perfect.
Again, I move that we vote on the fees and surcharges subcommittee on the FMC oversight of intermodal cargo on a through bill of lading.
Second.
Good. Mike, please. All right. With the motion seconded, I will please vote yea or nay. Mr. Brock?
Yay.
Mr. Colley?
Yay.
Mr. Connor?
Yay.
Mr. Crutchfield?
Yay.
Mr. Fremont?
Yay.
Mr. Healy?
Yay.
Mr. Hughes?
Yay.
Ms. Jacobson? Mr. Loganell?
Yay.
Ms. Levitt?
Yay.
Mr. Miller sends in his vote, and it's a yay. Ms. Minsky?
Yay.
Ms. Morrissey?
Yay.
Mr. O'Brien?
Yay.
Mr. Cudry?
Yay.
Mr. Roche?
Yay.
Mr. Rodriguez?
Yay.
Mr. Simoneus?
Yay.
And Mr. Bumpus?
Yay.
So the count is 19 ayes. The ayes will have it. We will have a final vote count in the minutes that come out.
So for both of these recommendations, they both come out of the Freight Charges Subcommittee, so Rich will sign these recommendations in their current draft form. I will sign as chair of the full committee, and we'll tender these to the FMC by Monday of next week.
Sounds good.
Okay, great. Besides those recommendations, Rich, is there anything else that you want to cover from the Data Subcommittee? I'm not data, I'm sorry, Freight Charges.
No, we just have, you know, and we'll look for any feedback as we push these others out to the committee on ERD, customs hold, liner demurrage, and dispute resolution. And if the committee overall thinks that there's other topics that they'd like us to take a deeper dive into, that we're happy to look at those as well. So just
Rich,
get
quick
in touch.
question on the ERD, since it's near and dear to our members' hearts at American Cotton Shippers. Can you shed a little more light on kind of the focus of what you're talking about in the subcommittee so far?
Yeah, I mean, it's in draft form at this point, and we're still undergoing dialogue. Certainly, it's with the ever-changing liner schedules, we're finding that we're getting stuck with actual demurrage that we have to pay when we miss these ERDs, when they change on us and whatnot. There's additional charges that we incur in terms of storage and extra drop-off fees and chassis that the containers are sitting on. So we're trying to contemplate, you know, what's a fair doctrine on ERD. There doesn't seem to be one today, and we're going down and exploring all of those types of issues. And I think that, you know, we would welcome any comments, further comments, that people who are experiencing those, if they want to weigh in. The draft recommendation, which we're thinking will be finalized sometime next week, will be circulated to the overall committee for your comments, and we invite that you do please comment on that.
Appreciate the
Yep.
overview.
Yep.
Yep.
If you want to add in on that, go ahead.
No, just to echo what Rich is saying, it's still in draft mode here, so I don't want to get into specifics too much. But we're just trying to establish some formality around the notification and the accuracy of ERD changes for vessel rolls, vessel slips, vessel advances. and how that affects the exporter and the importer. So like Rich mentioned, we should have something ready by the end of next week, and then hopefully for the next meeting, we'll have something to vote on.
Sounds good.
That
Any
would-
other any other updates from you?
That's it.
That's it. Okay, cool. Well, thank you guys for your support on these two recommendations. I feel pretty good about getting these through. I think we've all done some good work on that. Chris, you have a?
Yeah, I just have a question in general, on these recommendations, since first two that we've done, what's the next step from here besides signing it and submitting it?
Dylan will answer this one.
Sure. So as the recommendations come out of the committee, those will be sent to the commission. And the commission, according to the charter, will have 60 days to respond to the recommendations. That's sort of the next step.
Cool. A couple of housekeeping items really quickly before we make some closing comments here. I don't believe, Dylan, that there's any written comments from the public?
No.
Just talk loud, man.
We have no comments, no recent written comments from the public. So, yeah.
Good deal. We need to work on that handoff, Dylan.
We'll get there. We'll get there eventually.
Shoot. Fumbles like that, they'll start us for the Bills. There you go. Sorry, Rich.
Yeah. We do have a guest in the room that, behind you. I don't know if you.
I know, that's why I made the joke.
Okay, good deal. All right.
All right, so a couple of housekeeping items. With the formation of a third subcommittee and a lot of progress being made in the subcommittee forums, I think we're going to focus most of our efforts in that subcommittee environment. We seem to kind of breeze through these full committee meetings, fairly quickly. So multiple members have raised the question of should we kind of expand the scope of, or the schedule, let's say, of our full committee meetings from every 2 months to perhaps every 3 months or even every 4 months with virtual meetings in between to alleviate travel costs and expenditure. Any comments? We can just do a quick thumbs up if everybody's in favor of that. Okay, cool.
Those two have more frequent subcommittee meetings and less frequent.
Correct. Correct. Yeah. So the next full committee meeting then, based on this new schedule that we're talking about, would be July, end of July. We can trade some emails back and forth and narrow down that date. And we'll do that in person as well. I'll volunteer to host that in our office complex in Houston. And we'll get the logistics set up for all of the members that confirm that they can attend. So it should be a streamlined.
In July.
Yeah.
July.
Steve, misery loves company. So I'd like to have you guys in my town. So we can pick locations for the other meetings for the rest of the year as we get closer to those dates. But that's really it from a housekeeping standpoint. I'm going to give the mic to Mike and get some vice chair.
Brian.
Closing remarks.
Again, I really appreciate the opportunity to spend time with people in person. It really shows the value of connection, human connection, especially as we're trying to talk through these complex issues and work together on trying to come up with some recommendations on behalf of the overall scope of what we're focused on. Again, I think as we continue to work through this stuff, and my hope is that we will get more public commentary. For my members' organization, we are looking at this stuff and getting affirmation before I vote on their behalf that we're in agreement, right? And so we need to hear from the broader parts of the country and the shipper community on these issues. They're important, you're facing them. We know there's a lot of tactical issues that are going on that take away from thinking about the broader streams of these things and the underpinning reasons that we're facing them. And at the same time, I think we've got to hear from more people to really figure out, are we moving in the right direction on these things? We do based on who we are and how we're trying to represent the broader shipper community, but it's important to hear from the broader shipper community as well. And again, I think as we look at what we're continuing to do, make sure that we are bringing in other parties that are involved in this. This is not the shipper community aiming our ire in these times at the people we work with. We are part of an extended network. We rely upon each other to get our work done on a day-to-day basis. We know what's not working, and the way forward is together. So I will sit to my last day saying we've got more common interest than divergent interest in what we do. So let's try to figure out how to make some impact.
Thanks, Mike. I just want to, applaud our committee again. you know, I feel good, and I hope you guys do as well. Like, we have some momentum now. We know each other. We're getting more comfortable in the setting. And the productivity is certainly increasing. It's also good to see that a lot of the things that we've, you know, jointly experienced and initiatives that we want to tackle in this committee dovetail quite nicely with other initiatives like Commissioner Binsel's on items that the FMC has already, you know, looked at, but maybe needed some additional guidance from those of us kind of on the front lines in the tactical day-to-day work in this environment to sort of point them in the right direction, or just, you know, reaffirm that they're going in the right direction. So, you know, certainly more, you know, it's fulfilling to begin to make progress and get some recommendations on the board. And I really appreciate you guys, your dedication of time to do that on both subcommittees, and the time you're taking away from your families and from your real jobs that pay your salary to serve your country and serve the FMC. So thank you. I'm honored to be a part of it. So.
All right, and with that, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.